Welcome everyone to Vibrant Publishers podcast, where we interview experts in various fields to share their insights and knowledge with our listeners. Today we are joined by Michelle Bartonico, who is an experienced solution-driven marketer and project manager with more than a decade of experience in higher education and marketing agencies servicing clients in breadth of industry verticals from healthcare to manufacturing. She's a certified project management professional, PROSCI certified change practitioner, Six Sigma Yellow Belt, and has completed the Google Project Management Career Certificate Program. Michelle has also earned the SEO specialization from US Davis Continuing and Professional Education. She's the author of our book in the self-learning management series, Stakeholder Engagement Essentials, which is available in stores. So grab your copy now. Michelle, welcome to our podcast and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, I would like to begin by understanding how you developed an interest and became an expert in project management.
So I think first I would say thanks for referring to me as an expert, because I'm not sure that really anyone can be an expert in project management, since there are so many dynamics and dynamics with different projects and people related to that. But how I began developing an interest is my sort of previous life was in marketing and communications, and
Okay.
I got to a point where I realized that so much of what I was doing was managing portfolios of work, managing projects, and helping to motivate people, and just was naturally inclined to liking the idea of completing work that is sustained over time and driving value for whatever institution or organization I was working for. And so I actually was accepted into the Whitman School of Management at Syracuse University, and I had started a semester there and realized that I didn't need that much finance in my background. So I stumbled upon project management and the PMP being something that I wanted to focus on. And I just started studying for it and I went for it. And so it just was a couple of things that came together, and a door that was closed and then something that was opened for me to step through.
So, you hadn't decided that you always wanted to pursue a career in project management, but you just went with the flow.
Yeah, basically, I suppose. Yeah, I realized that a lot of what I had been doing was some of the critical components of successful project management. And that was structuring teams, managing teams, bringing value, completing projects, forecasting. And so when I came across a sort of more structured field or area of study, that's when I said, I think this is the right time in my personal and professional life to make that switch from marketing and marry that with project management.
Oh, okay. Thank you for sharing that. Now, stakeholder engagement is a good part, an important part of project management. So, for the listeners and readers, could you explain what exactly is stakeholder engagement and how is it different from stakeholder management?
So technically, it shouldn't be different from stakeholder management. Stakeholder engagement should technically not be different from stakeholder management, but the perception of managing stakeholders versus engaging stakeholders is very different. No one wants to feel managed. People want to feel engaged. And especially when you're working throughout a project, a stakeholder is anyone who has a stake of any sort in your project, if that is the initiation, the closing, the sustainment of your project after closing. So anyone who has a stake wants to feel engaged at whatever portion or part of the project makes sense for them. So it's not technically different than stakeholder management, but the paradigm shift between even the PMBOK thinking about stakeholder engagement versus management is, I think, indicative of the just general shift in mentality for people who are project managers feeling like they need to actually collaborate and engage, as opposed to dictate and keep track of and monitor and manage their stakeholders.
So just a shift in that one word changes things from dictatorship or dictating to collaboration.
Yes, I think so. And just the idea that you are really trying to marry the pro-sci organizational change management approach of not only engaging people, but engaging the right people at the right time. That's kind of my marketing hat, I suppose. But engaging the right people at the right time and helping them become champions of whatever you're trying to achieve. And that is where sort of that change management portion comes into play as well.
Okay, great. Could you give a few key takeaways from the book?
Of course. So within the book itself, it's about stakeholder engagement. So it's going to be covering everything from how do you identify stakeholders? How do you create a stakeholder engagement plan? How do you work with difficult stakeholders? And what do those difficult stakeholders look like? What are their characteristics? How do you spot one early so that you can pivot or engage them differently? And there's a pretty sizable portion of the book on mapping, stakeholder mapping and analysis, so that you can not necessarily get bogged down with the details, but understanding power structures and influence of your stakeholders is really important throughout your project.
All right, got it. So I've read the book, and in a section of your book, you have explained what isn't stakeholder engagement. So are there any common misconceptions or myths that you would like to dispel regarding stakeholder engagement?
That's a great question. I think probably the top thing I think the top myth, I suppose, that I would try to dispel would be that a stakeholder is only someone who is significantly impacted by your project. And that's not true. A stakeholder is anyone who has a stake in your project, in the stake of the outcome. So it could be someone who is the supply chain manager. It could be someone who is the actual IT person in charge of integration. It could be the user, so the customer, the person who's actually using what's being implemented at the end of your project. So it's not just one group that is your stakeholders that you're thinking about. It has to be everyone in some capacity who is touched or has a stake in your project or project outcome.
Okay, so to summarize, it's not just the top level authorities, but it's a collaboration between all levels, whoever is involved in the project. If
Whoever is involved in the project outcome or has a stake in that project outcome, and that could be, depending on how you're mapping things, it could also be groups. So you could say that the executive leadership team at the city of San Antonio, instead of naming each person, right? It just depends on how large your project is and how feasible it is for you to actually engage each literal person, or if you want to take the approach of engaging that leadership team. But yes, in summary, it is not just a top-down group that you need to engage. It is a full spectrum of individuals or groups who have a stake in your outcome.
Okay. So your book offers a lot of practical advice for implementing strategies in stakeholder engagement. So could you share some example of a specific tool or exercise that the readers can use?
Sure. So I'll go back to the stakeholder mapping and analysis. One of the key factors that I believe is really important when you're trying to orient yourself to your own project and think about what that success and value delivery might be is understanding and mapping that power and influence matrix. Whether or not you literally use Mendelow's matrix. If you literally use a power and influence matrix, is up to you. You could use a salience model and different mapping techniques like that. But understanding the relationship between the different power and influence structures or people to your project is something that I would say is probably one of the two keys to stakeholder engagement. The first being just identifying who is actually your stakeholder. So identifying them and then understanding that dynamic with power and influence structure.
Okay. And a lot of stakeholder engagement, this whole process may involve conflict sometimes
Yes.
when it comes to needs and interests of different stakeholders. So any advice on how professionals can balance the needs and interest of different stakeholders?
Yeah, that's that's probably one of the trickier elements. But first, I would say lean on your stakeholder register, and your stakeholder register is something that you create when you've identified your list of stakeholders or stakeholder groups, and then again, map how salient they are to your project and what their influence is to you as a project manager, and then to your outcome. But once you've leaned on something like that, honestly, my best advice and something that's worked for me is just to exercise as much empathy as you possibly can. There's a chapter in the book about empathy, and there are a couple exercises where it asks you to assume a different role or a different viewpoint when you're looking at the same picture of something. And it's really a way to practice coming outside of yourself and thinking about how might this other person be viewing something, how might they be feeling about the information that's been given to them, and just trying to approach it with a level of genuine curiosity. And when there is severe conflict between two groups, or between you maybe as the project manager and the
Yeah.
person who's having a particular issue, again, go back to your stakeholder register. How important or influential is this person to the success of your project? And that's one of the ways you can determine how you'd like to handle it, how you want to escalate the conflict, how you want to de-escalate the conflict, and if you want to get anyone else involved to help you mitigate that.
Right. And this is going to take a lot of practice, I feel. Just
Yeah,
practicing.
that's definitely why I was that's why I definitely think that people can be experts in the perhaps techniques that are used, the sort of technical aspects of stakeholder engagement and even project management as a whole.
Yeah.
But there's endless dynamics and endless politics and endless types of projects, right? They're all unique. That's part of why it's a project. So it's a fun and interesting field to be part of, I think.
All right. So, personally, what do you prefer? Do you prefer teaching project management or stakeholder engagement, or do you prefer being an industry expert and working on a project?
I prefer working on a project.
Yeah.
I I mean I enjoy mentoring as much as I can, or as much as anyone would let me be a mentor, but I do like having close contact with the actual work and feeling like I'm tied into what the latest best practices are, that I can say that I've been part of making mistakes or learning from things or dealing with really difficult stakeholders or having a project be sort of, in my case, institution wide versus a sort of smaller, less high impact project. So I definitely prefer getting my hands dirty and actually working in the project with a project team.
Okay. So a follow-up to that is, what are some of the top lessons that you've learned so far in your career?
Oh gosh. Well, this is getting personal. Let's see.
I think since you're an expert, the audience is going to get a lot of value from your lessons.
So so my career in general has not just been project management, right? It's been marketing communications, and within marketing communications, I was the assistant vice president for that office at Trinity University. So some of the lessons that I learned with that also carry over to project management. Honestly, empathy and patience is going to be the first top lesson for me.
Right.
That had to be a learned skill. I'm not naturally someone who is inclined to say, let me take a breath, let me listen to your perspective, let me try to understand it and try to understand the root of what you're trying to get at, and then try to solve for that. So that took a lot of practice, and that was really that level of just self-reflection and patience was hard. And so that would be lesson number one. Try to work on yourself a little bit and be self-reflective. Try to get your own mirrors and look at how you approach people and how you package and present yourself. And that may be a cause of success or a failure point, depending on your stakeholder engagement. I've also learned that the power of relationships is paramount. It's probably fairly obvious,
Yeah.
but I think that if you are someone who's more of an introvert, that may be kind of a scary endeavor to sort of quote unquote meet new people, engage, build relationships with new people. But I would just say, again, building genuine relationships really just means building trust. And that is going to go a long way for you. So if you happen to be an extrovert, it's going to be a breeze probably, but be as genuine regardless of your particular preference in approaching people and working with people. Let's see, I'll give you one more lesson, I suppose. Don't be afraid to say you need help. So early and often, if you feel like you have a materializing risk, it's okay to say you have a materializing risk. It doesn't have to even be a risk at the point that you bring it up. If it's a materializing risk, if it's something that you feel like you see around a corner on, just bring it up. Bring it up to your team. It should be a safe space for you to talk to people. That should be the culture that I would recommend creating with your project team. And just say it's a materializing risk, maybe nothing, but I'm just flagging it early before it's even a risk, and certainly before it's an issue.
Okay. So you mentioned introverts. Any advice for the introverts to improve upon their project management skills, and how, because it's going to be a little bit more difficult than the extroverts. So any advice on managing for the introverts?
Well, I mean, frankly, it depends on the type of project or industry you're working in. If you're working in an industry with other introverts, like a project team that has other introverts, then you're going to be probably much more inclined and able to connect. You can use Google Chat, you can use Zoom, you can use other technology to build relationships with people, as opposed to it being the pre-COVID environment where you needed to literally sit and get coffee with someone, which is wildly intimidating, I think. So there's a lot going for, I'll say us. I'm more or less an introvert. So there's a lot going for us when it comes to the technology and the expectations of people when building relationships now. So, but what I would say as a just more practical tip, it would be to use your time wisely, because it's going to be draining. So use your time wisely, lean on the power influence matrix that you create, lean on your stakeholder engagement tools and say, all right, if I only have enough energy to meet and kind of build a relationship throughout this project with like 2 people, who would they be? And lean on your team to say, okay, can you build a relationship with these folks? And it doesn't have to just be you as the project manager building all the relationships. It can be members of your team where it makes sense. And it can't feel forced. It shouldn't feel forced. So it shouldn't be all of a sudden I'm reaching out to somebody and asking for coffee for no reason. You should be transparent about, hey, I'd like to get to know you more. We're working together on a project. And I think it'll be beneficial for both of us to have a level of understanding of where each other's coming from and just be open and honest about it.
Okay, that's a great answer. So, in this age of artificial intelligence, and since the technology has had such a big impact, how can organizations use tools and technologies to enhance their stakeholder engagement efforts? And are there any risks or limitations with these tools?
Risks or limitations? Well, with stakeholder engagement, I think the trickiest part that I've always struggled with is, you're having to map and analyze how people, usually people, right? I mean, it's more typically people, individuals, how salient they are, how influential they are to a particular project, not necessarily to your organization, but to your project. And I've always struggled with, do I just write this on a napkin somewhere? I don't ever want anyone to see it or find it or
Yeah.
like stumble upon it and say, oh gosh, like I think that Jennifer is not influential at all on this project. I just, you want to find a way that it's locked down somehow. So I do see that as a risk where anytime you put something like that online, even if it's within your Google Drive, within your company, I don't know, there's always the opportunity for there to be some sort of accidental leak of information that you don't want out there. In terms of other tools or AI that have come out, Chat GPT has been really foundational for just efficiency in general. So just the other day, I was talking to my supervisor and he was joking that he went into Chat GPT and said, write me a project portfolio management plan. And it didn't write the plan, but it wrote the outline. So those are tools that will be really, I think, exciting for people to have at their fingertips. And it will get only stronger and more effective in the future.
Okay, great. So now I want to shift to your author part, your experience as a first-time author. And could you share us some tips, especially for the first-time authors, because writing can be a very daunting task. And any advice to these authors when it comes to setting a writing routine or staying motivated throughout this whole process?
Yeah, it was definitely daunting. I would honestly, I would say project manage your project. Think of your book as a project.
Project, right?
So what I did is I mapped out, okay, if I have whatever 5 months to write something, I think I'm going to have 8 chapters. So I'm going to allow myself to take every opportunity to write if I'm in the mode, because sometimes you're just thinking about it, think ideas are flowing, you want to get things on paper. And so don't limit yourself to a certain structure. Like I'm only going to write from 2 to 5 and just write whenever you feel a flow to something. Don't worry about the order of the chapters. I think I wrote the first chapter last actually. So don't worry about the order of the chapters.
Yeah.
Just write the content and try to organize it. But ultimately, my advice would be to look at the glass half full. There were definitely some times where I thought, oh my gosh, I have 20,000, 25,000 words left. But shifting my perspective to I've written 5,000 words was really
Right.
helpful. So thinking about things increasing versus what you have as a daunting, oh, I have 20,000 words left. but
Yeah.
just to say, wow, I've already knocked out 10,000 words. And then as you get to that tipping point, you'll naturally, I think, start to think, great, I only have 5,000 left, or great, now I have 10,000 left. Whatever that trigger point is for you, then you'll start to feel like this is doable. I've already written 10. So of course I can write another 5. Of course I can write another 10.
And any advice on overcoming writer's block? Any activities that
I
you
would just
did?
say, yeah, I would for writer's block, I would just say keep writing, even if you're like, ugh, I wrote this and it's terrible. But there may be, and I'm doing that right now, actually. So I'm writing something for marketing, and I wrote a couple paragraphs, and I just thought, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
But there were a few sentences in there that were fine and it led me down a path later on that were helpful. So I would just say, just keep writing. And for me, I like writing a lot on my phone. So if I'm on the go and I'm thinking about something, I'll write it down there. So that's helpful. I don't have to just sit down at my computer and hope that I'm ready to write. So I'd say if you're able to write on something more mobile, then that could be helpful to overcome writer's block, because if you're in the moment and want to write something down, you can.
Yeah, that's a great advice. So you can just write out whatever comes to your mind, and eventually you'll bring out the quality as you.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Now, this was really insightful. And now you have chosen to publish your book with our publishing house. And could you give a feedback on your experience on working with us and what made us stand apart from others?
Yeah, you guys have been awesome. More specifically, I would say that you all have been very organized, which to me, that's really important. And you've been organized, you've been transparent, you've been accommodating and flexible, which has been quite helpful. And especially as someone who was a first-time publisher or first-time author,
Yeah,
I was a little anxious about, okay, am I signing a contract that's legitimate? Am I signing something that's really going to come to fruition? Am I just going to be writing for ultimately nothing? And there's always that risk, right? But
right.
you guys have been really responsive and helpful, and I think just friendly, and I think that's been nice.
Thank you so much for the kind words. And thank you for taking out your time to join us today and sharing your valuable insights. Uh, and to our audience, stakeholder engagement is out. Please order now. It is available on all the stores. Michelle, we wish you all the best for your future projects, and we hope to publish more books with you. And for our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.